Do you actually do you watch a lot of like podcasts online or anything?
Nope.
No, not at all.
No.
Okay, but you don't have TV either, right?
No, I watch some things, but
okay, like on Twitter or?
I actually don't watch a lot of videos. I watch for video rights.
Willem, of course. Yeah.
Yep.
Kind of have to if he comes here. Kind of.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Well, thank you for coming today. I think maybe it's nice for the people also to maybe you introduce yourself a little bit.
Yeah.
So because obviously I know you, right? I'm talking to Erika, but.
Yep. Yeah. I'm Erika Turkstra. I'm Dutch. I grew up in Friesland and have then studied in Groningen. I studied biology. And at the time, biology was biology. So I had to do plants, animals, everything within the biology. After studying biology, I did a PhD in renal physiology in Utrecht, and I even did a postdoc afterwards. And then I decided I didn't want to do that type of research, and I moved to public service. I worked for a couple of years looking at the public health and safety of pesticides. So I moved a bit away from the real research, but worked within the government, looking whether pesticides are harmful for people.
I see. So what caused you to choose to study biology in the first place, though?
To be honest, it was I wanted to do something health sciences. And I went to a couple of open days, and I thought Groningen was an interesting city, and I thought biology or pharmacy. And the guy who was at the open day for biology was more interesting than the person from pharmacy. And that's actually the sole reason that I decided to do biology. So pure chance. But I've also thought about other types of biology, going to Wageningen and being really focused on a bit more the land.
Kind of similar to what you ended up in eventually, right? Like Wageningen, agriculture, pesticides, has a little bit more.
No, not really. That was
no connection, or
no. And how I got into that public service was also a pure chance because of all sorts of reasons. A fellow PhD student had applied somewhere else, and someone called her, and she had already another job. So she said, "Erika, is this something for you?" So I had an interview, and I got the job.
Okay.
So a real kind of accidental that I moved into these pesticides was not too closely related to my PhD.
No, because you said renal biology?
Renal physiology. So how your kidneys work.
I see. Oh, renal physiology.
Yeah, renal is kidneys, physiology, how they function. And so I did a lot of animal experiments at the time and lab experiments.
When you say animal experiments, it brings for me a lot of very, very dark aspect. I don't think that's what you did, but that's just my first association.
But one of the things I really learned there was what is data, or how I learned it. The main objective was to get an asterisk in a graph. That was the main objective of statistics. So you chose your statistics to get an asterisk in a graph. You also, I did animal experiments, and if the animal didn't look normal, we kicked it out of the experiment. That was so. In hindsight, you can ask. Yeah, it was a pretty good research, but the asterisks and understanding of statistics was not really important in that sense. And this was at a medical school, and I realized in hindsight that was not something they cared about.
They didn't care about getting like good data,
we had good data, but they didn't care about the statistics necessarily, and there was a bit of already we need to get the publications, and
right.
And there were still quite interesting things, but I'll come back to this data in a bit. But
sure. That is
in hindsight, how I did work with data is not how I would work with data nowadays. I've learned a lot, and this is more than 25 years ago that I did my PhD. So it's a while ago that I worked with that, and I've learned since then. So I've been on a continuous journey of learning, even after I did my undergrad and my PhD. It's continuously. So I started working, looking at whether pesticides are safe, and it wasn't really where my passion was. I did it. I was really happy not being in a government environment because there the 9 to 5 attitude was actually really there. You didn't. It was much easier to combine with a young family at the time.
You were in a government environment, right?
Yeah. So I worked for the National Institute of Public Health and Environment, RIVM, for a couple of years, which some people will know. There are some. It was an interesting learning curve to see how to look at this data. And I learned a lot at that time. Then we decided as a family to move to Australia. And I landed into Food Standards Australia New Zealand, which is a government agency for Australia and New Zealand looking at public health and safety of food additives, contaminants, food nutrients, minerals, vitamin minerals. I worked there as a toxicologist for a couple of years, and that came through connections.
The disturbance not appreciated.
No, where are we doing it?
We'll edit this out. We'll edit.
Yeah.
or maybe not. I'll lock it. Yeah, you're right. All right. Maybe we won't edit this out. That's a little human touch.
Yeah. So I worked there for a couple of years, and the Australian government had a very strong rule. You needed to be Australian to have a permanent position. So,
really, to have a full contract in the
a full-time contract.
Really, you had to
a permanent position. So you could get a temporary contract, but not. And
I'm not sure that would fly in many places today.
That was their policy at the time. So I had 5 contracts in 3 years, and then I had to reapply for my contract.
You had 5 temporary contracts
in 3 years, and then I had to reapply for my own job.
I see. Okay.
For another temporary contract.
Did they hire you?
Yes, but I decided to move elsewhere. But whilst at the government, what I really learned was what bureaucracy is. I was the scientist, the toxicologist, writing a report on the public health safety for many products, food additives, contaminants. Novel foods. I've also looked into vitamins and minerals, leveraging materials from Europe and the US. So I wrote this lengthy report. Only my supervisor would review it. And then there were another 10 people who had to review it. The lawyer expected me to write the legal terminology because the reports were intended to change the food standards code. So it's a legal requirement.
It becomes law after, right?
It becomes a law.
Yeah.
So I had to write the legal bit because the lawyer says, you have to write it. And then they started complaining I couldn't write it. Then you had the communications officer, the admin person, the chief scientist who didn't have time to read it, the CEO, and I don't know who had to review it, but there were lots of people, and they actually didn't really look at most of the things I wrote. So I felt that I couldn't grow much within the field in the more technical side because there were so many people who, in my opinion, didn't do that much, and that was
right. Or they all have to do things that that involve you, like reviewing your work, but not necessarily adding to things themselves. So it's all checks, basically, all checks.
Yeah, it was very much a checkbox exercise, and also they wanted one person to write a report, whilst the intent is a lawyer write the legal parts, I would think. But they expected me to do it, and they were not interested in all the detail. That was really clear. They want 325 kind of approach.
Right.
1 page is the elevator pitch, 3 pages is your summary, and 25 is your report.
Right.
So but I learned a lot in the sense of how governments work, and
And when you see this bureaucracy, because you said there is where you learned about bureaucracy.
Yeah.
But if you take that knowledge that you picked up there, did you then have realizations of like, oh, I've actually experienced this before as well in other places? You just didn't see it, or maybe because now you've been inside, you notice the effects of it, where you were maybe on the outside in other places.
Yeah. So before that, I was in the Dutch government. I didn't have too much. There were more. It was much. So at the RIVM, there were more technical people around.
Yeah,
so you were around, and you got that support to actually help you improve your reports.
But RIVM is also not completely direct government, right? It's more it's more statisticians and scientists than lawyers, right? Yeah.
And before that, I was at university, so I didn't notice it as much.
Right.
I got experience with Dutch government, Australian government, so I worked there for 3 years. And then a contract came for a renewal, and there was an opportunity for Paul, my husband, to move to Brisbane to get a promotion. And since I had to reapply for my job, and I raised that, and they said, yeah, okay, we may get you a permanent position. However, if I wanted to get a promotion in the government, I wasn't allowed because I still didn't have. So it was only for that specific position. Even if I would kind of want to move sideways, that was not okay.
So you're still not growing, even if you do retake the same.
Yeah. And I didn't really. I learned a lot, but I felt stagnating. Then moving to Brisbane, I got a job in Queensland Health. And you think that would be an organization that really is healthy. It's the worst. So this was
do you mean, when you say the organization is not healthy, do you mean like as an organization, like as a structure, or like the people working in it individually?
Both.
Oh God, okay.
So
okay.
I was in the central office, and it had the sick building syndrome because there were 2 buildings quite close together. There was like a couple of meters between, so there was no daylight coming on the floor. So it was
sick building syndrome. I've never heard this.
You've never heard of sick building syndrome?
No.
It's when you have these offices that are really, you don't have any nice environment. So it's kind of concrete walls
okay.
No daylight. It's just...
so you become like no sunlight. You just become sick and depressed just because of the...
In addition to that, at the time in Queensland, they were going through reorganizations. So the whole atmosphere was not too positive. And I had there a job for a couple of months, and then they said, yeah, we can extend your contract, but then you have to go 1 pay level lower, but do exactly the same, because so going have a drop in salary of 15%, but doing the same because of the positions available. Then so I wasn't overly happy. The people, you can have too many meetings.
Yeah,
you also have no meetings.
I was just going to say, this sounds again like bureaucracy, just like
but
there
were no meetings. They were scared of people roaming the internet, and I had to do some research. I had to sit on a laptop or a computer in the corridor, which was the only computer which had like proper internet access. Yeah, this is 2006, but
I mean, still.
so it made it really difficult to do your research as well, because I had to look at various sources, and at your normal desktop, you could only search government websites, which made it a bit limited.
It's bias. Sounds like bias waiting to happen, or already has happened.
Yeah,
really.
But it's 2006. The times were a little bit different at that time, in the sense of relying on the internet for certain things. But we used it quite heavily for sourcing information, and websites started to be prominent. So I then applied at a job at a university, and it was something health technology assessment. I had no clue what it was, but it sounded like, yeah, I can do that. And I applied. I got a job, and health technology assessment is looking whether pharmaceuticals or medicines should be paid for by the government. And so the university had a contract with the federal government in Australia to look at materials provided by pharmaceutical industry. They had to provide the evidence. We had to go through all the materials, check what are the strengths and weaknesses of the data package, and then write a report, which was then used in their decision-making processes.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what I really started when I joined, but I quickly realized that I really enjoyed it. And I've been doing that for over 10 years in Australia. I moved to universities because it was temporary contracts, and the contract moved to a different university. And I was at some stage managing a large group who would write these reports. Since it was also an academic position within the university, I also had the normal research targets. I didn't have a teaching objective because of the report, the consulting we did.
Oh yeah, you're essentially it's a consultancy job, right?
It's a consulting for government. We also did specific reviews for the government. So we've done a couple of reviews, a review of a group of products for a certain disease. So we've done some reviews where we did systematic literature reviews, build economic models, etc. So it was a consulting job within a university setting, but we could only do consulting for government. We were not allowed to do consulting for pharmaceutical industries because of the conflict of interest. Yeah. I did that for over 11 years, and at some stage, you've done it for 11 years. It becomes a bit repetitive because you know where the weaknesses and the strength in the data packages are, and then it wasn't routine, but it became kind of
it becomes your trick essentially, right? You're like, okay, you know the trick, you just bam 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 execute it on the on a different data set.
Yeah, and then we moved to England again for various reasons, and I thought I can do the same trick for the National Institute for Healthcare and Excellence in England, NICE, which has a similar function. So I applied there, had a really good CV, and they said, "Yeah, you don't know enough about the English system," and that's not really the challenge, but. They didn't give me a job, so I started working for pharmaceutical consulting. So I did a lot of the gathering of the data, the evidence package on behalf of pharmaceutical industry. So provide them with suggestions what type of data they should be doing, what type of research.
I see. Okay.
So that they can put in that request for being paid, that product is being paid for by the government. So I worked from the other side, and having had worked in university, government, now for the first time in private sector, first time I actually had a permanent position. I never had a permanent position. I almost had it in the Netherlands, but then I moved, but university never provided me a permanent position. So I got a permanent position, and I realized that I was good at it, actually, also in providing that advice, because I had that experience from the payer perspective and could make clear what is really important from a payer perspective and what they really should be doing to do. So there are some products, pharmaceutical products, that actually will bring value to a patient.
Sure.
So I'm not, but as soon as there is a value for a product, then you start to look at how can you best show what the value of the product is. And
Right.
so what are really the key ingredients to show that it is a good product?
And you mean like, well, with pharmaceuticals in this sense, you mean like, was that only limited to like, okay, it can help people with this, and that? Or does it also extend to kind of finding problems for your solutions sometimes?
No,
or how should I see
so
this?
you have a product and you have a clinical trial, which is a certain duration, and just showing how is this clinical trial relevant for patients who actually would get the medicine.
Right.
So that's a couple of steps away. The patients in the clinical trial might be patients in the US. How are they related to patients in the UK or in Belgium or in the Netherlands?
Yeah.
Are they, especially the control patients, are they getting the same treatment as they? So you need to have some evidence what is currently happening in your country. So things like that.
Yeah, I think that.
It was interesting jigsaw, so to say. I like kind of doing this puzzle problem solving, and whilst working there, I also developed business development as the name, so getting new business. I did a lot of line management, a lot of project management, project leadership, etc. So I worked with quite a variety of people. So people from industry, we had to deal sometimes with government people. We were dealing with people high up, people low in a company. And what I noticed whilst working there is that we were looking as a consultancy for people who were really could critically think, could really take it a bit beyond what's on the paper. So kind of start making links and making connections.
That's actually kind of a good bridge to talk about that, because I wanted to talk to you about, because you've said a lot now about the systems you've worked in. It's very interesting to see, because you've seen it from all sides. But I'm also interested in a little bit the personal side. So you were about to talk about like hiring. We'll get to that, but what kind of patterns did you notice in like the people or the kinds of people that work in these institutions, right? That you've been like, you can maybe give like a per side, maybe like a short list. Like what did you notice in terms of like personal relationships or like personal quirks of these people?
So at the university, so when I did my PhD, but also when I was in Australia, the consulting part is a bit different, but academics are very much or often very much working on themselves. The collaboration sometimes might be difficult. I was at one place where there were really high targets in publications per year. And this was before I came there. So there were so many publications if you were an associate professor or a lecturer or whatever. And everyone worked really hard to get to that target. And then it was increased. And because of that personal targets,
the pressure of the targets,
you didn't want to, you became a competitor almost with your colleagues. And there wasn't much collaboration, because if I help you, and I'm not named on that publication, but I help you doing some statistics or some conceptual, but it's not sufficient to be
co-author.
A co-author. It takes time away for myself to publish. So it became everyone for themselves, and you had then the lead of your group would still work with you, but it was it wasn't that collaborative.
I'm kind of imagining now the visual of like the the office where everyone just has their own little box that they're like behind their computer in. Is it
you still had offices, but there wasn't much collaboration.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like everyone's in their own four walls.
There is collaboration, but often it's, say, the supervisor, like the PhD supervisor with the PhD students and with the postdoc. At the senior level, there is collaboration, but at the lower levels, there is no collaboration with like people from same level.
So it's kind of already, people call the 9 to 5 a rat race, but it's already kind of a rat race there.
Yeah. So that was one of the things. Also, during the time I was there, I've seen an increase in admin. So non-teaching or non-academic positions.
Yes.
And university, but also all the companies, it's always been a movement from centralizing to decentralizing. That's always going backwards and forwards. So things like supportive support that you need, like your IT, if your laptop breaks down, works in every organization, whether you're in the government, whether you're on the university or everyone has laptops or computers. What happens if it breaks down? In every organization I've seen, it's the local guy around the corridor. You ask him, "Oh, can you please look at my computer?" He does it. You say thank you. You give him you drink a cup of coffee or have a beer at the end of the day, and it works. And then they centralize it, and then you need to have someone to talk with the centralized person. I've had one place where they said, I can't get into my emails. Sorry, that's not a high importance concern. We'll look at that in due time. Things like that.
Next month.
And
so somebody is too important for that.
So within the university it was. But when I was a PhD student, it was very social with the other PhD students because you're all in the same group. So you're us versus them, and us is the small group with the same or a couple of PhD supervisors joined together. And there wasn't that much diversity, so you're quite focused on what you're doing. In the government, there was... in the Netherlands, it was a bit similar to university, but it was a bit more outcomes oriented. So as at the university, you're making your own agenda, but you have your grants, so you have your deadlines for grants and the grant reports, etc.
You have deadlines, but it's not. You don't have, or maybe you do, like the same requirements of you need to publish this many things.
It's up to you if you want to publish everything on the 31st of December, so to say. You do that. And for the grants, a year in advance the deadline is that day in the year. So it's. Most people make the time, get the urgency because they kind of don't work on it, and then last minute they start working on it. In government, the timelines were shorter and much more regimented in that sense. So you have the turnaround times of reports. So a report needs to be developed in, for instance, 2 months. Then it needs to be finished in 2 months, and the day it comes in. Well, you have that much time, so it's a bit more timed in that sense.
Okay.
And in Australia, you also had if someone asked a question to the Prime Minister or a senator or so about anything related to food standards, there were a reply.
Did they ask you? They forwarded to you essentially.
I wasn't directly working with it, but
but your organization. Right?
And then you had different timelines. So my trick, if you want to really screw up, ask a question to the Prime Minister. That's at least in Australia. So don't ask your local member of Parliament. Ask the Prime Minister because that's a higher priority.
Okay, and why is that? Like you say, if you really want to screw up,
you ask lots of questions, and then the government, all these public servants are forever trying to collect all the data.
I see.
And this is happening a lot, but that will also increase your the workload, and you want more public service.
Yeah.
When I was working in Australia at a university, we had as I mentioned, we had the two things. We had the publication, your normal KPIs of a university, which is publish or perish is the saying. And then the other part was this consulting, and that was quite time dependent. So we had very short timelines that we needed to produce quite a few reports, and there were
because decisions need to be made based on whatever you bring back, right?
So they had these timelines which were published, and that meant we had only so many 8 weeks to write reports, and we didn't know what would come. We knew it the day we got the message. These are the number of reports. Deliver them within that time frame, and there was no wiggle room to extend the timelines.
It's different.
And so that was quite intense. And of course, decisions are being made, and public servants, etc., don't want to work over Christmas. So we have a deadline, the 8th of January always. So that was always my Christmas holiday.
To get back a little bit to the consultancy you were going to talk about earlier, like the kinds of people they have there or look for there. Is it similar to what you find in like the government institutions or the universities, or is it?
So because we were in consulting, we wanted people who had an academic degree, and because they needed to, at least for the consulting jobs, because you need to think independently, and there were a couple of different skill levels we needed. One is you needed to be able to write well, follow instructions, and think independently. So follow instructions and repeatedly, and think independently, and kind of become a bit of a problem solver.
They're a little bit contradictory, aren't they? Like follow instructions, think independently.
No, following instructions is if you need to write a report in a certain format, you write it in a certain format.
Okay. Broad guideline instructions.
So in that sense, it was follow instructions, but be creative you get a problem, how are we solving it? And you don't solve it by asking your supervisor, how should I solve it? But start thinking and also connecting the dots. So you read something, what does that mean? How does that fit within the things you know? So it's not an independent little piece of information. So if you write a report, we did a lot of report writing either in PowerPoint or in Word. There is an order and a flow in the report, but sometimes you need to change it around a bit because it doesn't make sense for that specific product, specific disease. So you need to think about, but this doesn't make sense. And also sense checking. If you write on page 1, this is a really dreadful disease, and then on page 10 you say, "Oh, no one dies," and that's not too bad.
Well,
that type of inconsistency. So you need to be able to spot inconsistency in the story, consistent story, and think about, okay, we run into a problem. How are we going to solve it?
Yeah.
If you're only, you can. I'm just thinking of our roof worker who was here recently, who said, you come on a roof, there is a problem because it didn't go exactly how it... Well, what are you going to do? Are you going to follow what you do on a normal roof, or are you going to think about something like creative?
Adapt to the specific. We have the chapels here and the ridges there.
So it's because, as you may know, we're in a castle. The roofs are not all straight, etc. But if you have the attitude, a castle is exactly the same as a house built in 2024 or 25, currently being built, which is all really straight, etc., then you'll never be able to repair a roof in a castle.
Right.
And it's a bit similar with consulting. You're not being hired to just regurgitate what the client already wants. The client wants you to think with them and come up with solutions for their challenges.
They want a second opinion, essentially, right? They want like a different view.
Or sometimes they don't have time to do everything, but they often also want a sparring partner. So they want to really discuss with you, what if we do go left? Well, then these are the challenges. What if we go right? These are the challenges. And then you try to get some sort of middle way where you have a balance between what's sufficient.
Yeah. Or at least make the people aware of like, okay, if you go this way, these are the pros, these are the cons.
And this is really a challenge, and that's and you will run into a brick wall potentially. And what I've noted is that this is not something you can learn. This it's. I always say it's not rocket science. It's not that difficult, but you need to be comfortable enough to make decisions. And try to think about it. And of course, within when you start in the job, you will get that support. But the intent is that you learn to think independently with the knowledge you have. If you're really junior, they normally have to look at all the background information, and they start sifting through it. So me as a more senior person wouldn't look at all the detail, but I can go into the detail, but they need to tell me which detail I need to be looking at. And they need to be able to process and in a concise way, try to tell what is actually out there. And I've noted that that's sometimes very difficult, and there is some sort of laziness sometimes, and not always, or sometimes it's a skill they have not been trained to.
They're just not used to it.
Not used to it. And those who can actually think independently, that's the nuggets we want, who can get it done a lot and get that relationship with the client, because the client wants to feel trusted and doesn't want to hear just what you can get from ChatGPT, because that's not. And another aspect is because I had been working from the government perspective, I know what's on paper is not always exactly what they say. It's about that nuances. Everyone can read all the guidelines.
Can you give an example of that, just for like?
In the guidelines say those are, you have to do this and this, and then in the meeting report it says, this was decided, and then you sometimes what's really decided is during the coffee break, and certain things are not in that report because it's too sensitive. A good example is if a job applicant comes and it's someone who doesn't fit within the culture. Because I once interviewed someone who was so certain of himself. He was the best person ever, and he was going to be, this was for a very junior position in university, and he said, I'll be a professor in 5 years. But he was not technical, he was not that good, and quite arrogant, and we also got a negative reference from one of his previous supervisors.
Exactly who you don't want, really.
So we had to write, no, we don't want you. And first we didn't want to interview him because the CV, and we had that negative. And at some stage we had to interview him, but then we knew almost instantly, no, this is not going to work out. But how then to write that we don't like you? That's not always exactly what sentiment is, but you need to be sensitive. Certain things you can't say. And is that fair? That's life in the end. So there is a lot of that subtlety that you can't say. Similar in these report writing. I can't be in specifics because I have this confidential.
No, of course.
But it is with just in real life. Do you really say, if someone says, do you like my shirt? And it's not that good. Do you say, it's awful?
Only if it's worth it. Only if it's worth the trouble, right? You say things like that.
You need to be knowing, can I say that to the person? If you don't know the person and you come meet someone on the street and say, look, do you like it? And it's neither here or there for you.
Yes. Yeah.
What do you say?
Yeah, of course. You just tell them like, yeah, it's nice. Yeah, exactly.
Well, do you mean it?
Right. But it's just like, is it? But it's like
But
I say, is it worth the trouble?
Yeah, but this is quite strong sometimes in consulting. We coming back to that consulting with the junior staff, they need to be trained. They need to get the constructive feedback. I've noticed sometimes they don't like the feedback because they've always heard at university they were the brilliant students. People from university having done a PhD, they say they are good at time management because they did a PhD in 3 or 4 years. That's not time management.
Yeah,
it's not working with others.
Yeah.
Also, what I noted over time, especially through Corona, so I worked in an office. I was there 5 days a week. All the junior staff were there. There was much interaction, so you learned from being with others. And the junior staff were working together and they were socializing. But if someone came across a problem, and that could be as simple as, I don't know how I change the headings in Word. Very simple, but it can take a long time to figure out how that goes. In the office, you see someone fiddling around and someone else helps you out. That button, and it's done. Same for, you hear about more technical problems or the work-related problems, so not like the applications, but some other things, which you may not have encountered, but you get exposed to some of the other work because we had a matrix system. So you had a director, a manager, and the analysts, so the staff who actually write the reports. And they would be on 2 or 3 reports, and that's all they knew. And only those people they worked with. And so they didn't know anything what other people are doing. And so there wasn't that much interaction, especially once people started working at home.
Remote, and then, COVID happens.
I've noticed that it's became quite hard to hire good people.
It's like our friend Lodewijk says, right? Collective intelligence is using, so that starts to diminish. For sure. During the remote work, I can imagine that made people a lot less cooperative. But even before, did you notice? Because a lot of people, I mean, every generation talks about like today's youth, right? But do you notice a pattern in that with age groups that it gets better or worse, or is it just people are people and some are good, some are competent?
It's not. I've seen some really good, very junior staff. It's a bit variable. We sometimes had different skill sets that we needed. The writing, AI might take over some of the writing, just to be transparent, because within English, the English sometimes were not as good a writer than foreigners. We worked in a large international company. Some of the language skills were sometimes a challenge. Being able to communicate in English. We did interviews with people for work with people of relevance, and it could be a clinician or someone who is in the decision-making process from the government side in various countries. And some people we could not put in front of an Italian because the Italian wouldn't understand. Or the Italian could not talk to someone from Sweden because of the accent. So we really, those type of skills, but also, really getting it and kind of making connections between different pieces of information you get. So you get 5 pieces of information and they see it as 5 separate pieces of information. And there's nothing in their brain that says, oh, I can connect them.
Bigger picture.
The bigger picture. Or they've done a project about something, then they have another project which is not completely similar, but a bit. And they don't realize, but these elements are the same as a previous project. So I can take learnings I made from that other project.
Where does that come from, do you think? Because to some people it seems to at least come more naturally to like think in like larger scale patterns. And I know like in recent years, like universities are much more, or studies rather, not even just universities, are much more specialized. But where do you think that comes from? That some people have that bigger picture capacity and some don't seem to have it, or at least don't have it developed.
I think one of the real challenges is at universities, they learn to regurgitate what the teacher wants for your exam. Yeah. So your teacher says, I want this, and that's what they do.
Starts even before university, right? Like even,
and we took people from health sciences, so they don't even have the essay writing element as much in their degree compared to the social sciences. So they were really trying to, the teacher says, I need to learn this, these are the learning objectives, this is what I need to do. And you always have some who go beyond that, but the majority of students, or the people we hired, and even the people we didn't hire, are very much into, you tell me what to do and I'll do it. Very much they can replicate what they've done before. Sometimes not that good, but that's just a general. But if I ask, okay, you can replicate what you need to do, but in this case it was slightly different. So you can't completely replicate. So they would replicate everything or nothing, but they can't figure out that. But this section 6 you shouldn't be replicating. They don't see that necessarily.
Okay. And you think that's just because they're not challenged to do so in like not even just university, because most people don't go to university, but even like high school, elementary, high school.
You're not being challenged to see making those more connections between the different aspects. And what we noticed, so I was in pricing market access, which is quite broad, and lots of people saw, but you're not specialized. And then you had the statisticians, you had the economists, and they were very specialized, but they could not talk to someone who was not another economist or another statistician. And they thought their work was the most important part.
Don't they all? Don't we all?
We all think, and of course I thought my part was, but I could connect the various components into an integrated story. So that connecting the various aspects. So you have the clinical aspects, the economic aspects, the statistical aspects, all interwoven into one story. And many people could only do or the clinical aspect, or the statistical aspect, or the economic aspects. But that being able to mesh those things. To be honest, how have I learned within this field? I was thrown in the deep when I was working in Australia. When I started, I told you at the start, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what I was doing, so I started, and the support was limited, and I didn't know what I was doing. So I became self-didact. So I decided I want to know what I'm doing. So I started learning and asking people questions and doing. Just by doing, you learn a lot. So I actually, and the first time I wrote a report and then it was reviewed by the Department of Health, I got someone said, "What is this?" I said, "I don't know." But I learned from my mistakes, and I grew. And what I saw is a lot of people make the mistake. Everyone makes a mistake, but they didn't take that at heart and then grow from that. And that's, I think, it's that self-motivation to strive for better. And you can, it's sometimes the more difficult way. It's much easier to stay in your own little bubble and go with that within the working environment, what most people say. But that's the less interesting
for sure.
In that sense, because then you can I like that it's much more broader, and that you keep on learning. And so besides the more technical thing, I also learned a lot about organization, how they work, and what works and what doesn't work. So there are some skills that
you really become a more like complete person with a full skill set.
Yeah,
actually, because what you said earlier about the kind of the lattice work, the connections between all those fields you learned, it reminds me of because obviously you're part of a project. We're on the ALM podcast right now, and they're trying to do some of these things better. But it reminds me of the visual you guys have of like the lattice work, the Matteklopper, right? With all the connecting all the different fields. We'll probably edit it in somewhere. It's actually a very, very nice visual. But something like that seems almost only achievable, to me at least, through just hard experience. Right? Do you think so?
No, not necessarily. I mean, here within ALM, you don't need to have a really high level of knowledge. It's just that our knowledge is currently so elementary, and people then don't dare to say anything because they might sound stupid. So they feel it's out of their comfort zone.
That's a big aspect too, isn't it? Like you might sound stupid, like making a mistake is the absolute worst thing you can do.
Yeah, and
then
people say, oh, you can never ask a stupid question. No question is a stupid question, but you can be having really stupid questions. If you're asking...
If you're not paying attention, right? Then you're,
Well, if you're listening to a whole lecture and then ask... What is ALM standing for? After you've listened for a whole hour that's a stupid question.
Yeah, but like I said, because you've not been paying attention in the first place.
And it's people find that difficult often to admit that they don't understand anything about it. You have a whole bunch of people who. So there is often a disconnect between the teacher and the students, or in whatever context you have it. So that there's not a true conversation. So people feel, and a lot of people who are the expert will instantly find a hole in your story and say, oh, but that's not true. It's not complete. And people feel intimidated. So intimidation is often being used. So, oh, but you don't know anything about modeling. I had that when I started in the consulting. I hadn't built an economic model myself, but I had played enough with models to know what is a good model and where to look. And I found a couple of errors in a model. I didn't like it because I'm not a modeler. So this is their domain. I'm treading on their domain. And
now they're threatened because
they felt threatened by me going into their domain. So I had to be a bit more subtly highlighting that when there was some...
You're like, maybe here, maybe look there. You know, like you're hiding Easter eggs or like something. But that sensitivity, though, is probably also a result of the very regimented work fields, because if they themselves were more like broadly developed, then they probably wouldn't be. They'd be like, oh, she knows something I don't. But because everybody is so set into their own little niche, then once you enter that niche, they feel threatened.
Yeah, and there was also another aspect. So within consulting, you have a lot of promotions, and you start with doing the actual work, and then you become managing people doing the work, and you have a lot of client interaction, and then you start moving into bringing in new business, and then you become a leader in doing more management. So that's kind of the go. And some of the specialists found it really difficult to move from doing the work. So they start with doing complex, say, statistical analysis. So they're really good in statistical software. But then they need to start talking to a client. Sometimes the client is not a statistician, and they start talking in a very complex formula. And the client has no clue, because the client has never done well, does know a bit about stats and know there's some sport.
But
it's so, and then they need to move in getting new business. So they can often only get business from other statisticians. So clients, the statistical departments of clients, or they are relying on other people to bring in that work because of the translational issue that they find it difficult to talk a different language. You need to talk different. You shouldn't be able to talk a different language, but it's the differences in terminology, etc.
Exactly. Yeah.
And understanding what need to be what's important, because they think their stuff is the most important. Yeah, you need to, and also you have the essentials in anything. The Rolls Royce or the cheap car. Do you want to drive? Do we need a Rolls Royce with all bells and whistles? Or can we just have a cheap second-hand car that goes from A to B and is fully functional, but...
Is it good enough, and then focus on other...
So the client wants always all the bells and whistles, but the budget is for that small car. But as a consultant, so if you go to a car dealer, and they will kind of observe you and think, well, that person has a very big wallet, and will go straight away to the most expensive car and tries to sell you that with all the bells and whistles. If this car dealer thinks, no, this person doesn't have as big a wallet, it has no point in going to that bells and whistles, because you lose your client. Your customer, because customers think, but I can't afford that. So you need to kind of gauge which car to sell. Does that make sense?
No, it makes sense. You have to you have to adapt and see who you have in front of you, right? Instead of being only capable. You remind me of a saying that's often, I don't know who came up with it, but saying that if you can't teach something to someone who knows nothing about it, you don't truly understand it. Right? And that's, I think, what a lot of these statisticians sound like to me. It's like they understand it in their bubble, but if they have to explain it to someone like me, who only took it in stats in high school, then they couldn't, right? So they don't really. So they have maybe a very deep understanding of their single path, but they don't have a true, I mean, maybe not even deep, because they don't have a truly deep understanding of what it means in the broader, what their niche means in the broader world.
I don't want to be disrespectful to statisticians.
No, I'm using them as an example.
What I sometimes saw is,
them.
and this is also with academics, actually. So they've learned a certain trick, and the academics learn a trick, and then they apply that to everything in the world. It's like going back to the roof tiler. He has learned, it's often how to put tiles on a modern house. So that's only he can, but you put him in front of a different house, has no clue. And doesn't know where to start with thinking about it. And a lot of so always the same tiles, always the same type of approach. And you can get very far if you're only working on new constructions. And there is a lot of work there. But if there aren't that many new buildings, you need to get a job with older houses, they won't hire you, because you don't know about what's needed in different situations. So that's a bit the same in almost any, especially these kind of consulting jobs, that you need to support the customer. And supporting the customer is not necessarily to do the most fancy stats. Sometimes it is needed. Sometimes it's needed. Sometimes you need to do it, and you need to be able to understand what you're doing, but don't use the method just because you're the expert on that method. Sometimes a different method is more appropriate. And we've seen that sometimes with complex economic models, some staff can cope with it, and other staff say, oh, can I please do something which is kind of the 13 and a dozen?
But you have to be, to do that, you have to be comfortable or maybe more to say confident enough to decide, okay, I'm going to learn something new, right? Let's say the customer calls for something.
I mean, when you're really junior, it's not that important. You need to be open for sometimes not or feeling challenged. You need to like challenge, being challenged, and you need to be challenged a bit to grow. Yes. And if you're not getting challenged, you don't grow. And it's junior staff. It can be quite difficult to hire them. And if I'm thinking about the hiring process, we don't trust just a piece of paper anymore. So yes, I have an undergrad or PhD from whatever university, Polytechnic. Then we have quite a few hoops they still need to jump through. Talking, even actually an assessment. We often did read a journal paper and extract and answer some questions. One of the first questions was, what's the conclusion in less than 100 words? I've had...
Conclusion of what, sorry?
Of the paper or something. So there was a question, right in 100 words, this or that. And sometimes I had only bullet points. I wanted some prose. Or I got half a page with 500 words. It's about reading the question. And so I then scanned through the responses. If there were no proper grammar in, and we put a bit of time pressure, so they didn't have enough time to answer everything in general. So that was purposely. So how are they working on the stress? And can they still write a proper sentence? And then the answer was quite a few couldn't.
Well, I think that's actually because I wrote something down earlier when you said a lot of people, the people who have these troubles you're talking about, they're not comfortable making decisions. Right? And that sounds like that's obviously related to working under pressure. How would you? I want to work towards an end slowly but surely. But how to phrase this? What would you? How do you see people growing in being comfortable in taking decisions, even if you're maybe not sure if it's the right one, as if you're learning something? But
asking a lot of questions, to have a mentor. I always have a mentor and ask your buddies, so your work buddies, but also be not afraid to fail. I always, within my consulting, within any job, sometimes you make errors. The most senior person on the project takes the blame. Well, I take the blame. I'm not saying to a client, oh yeah, my junior screwed up. But when I see it, I think, yeah, they screwed up. I may talk that, I wouldn't blame them in public, but I would have a good discussion with the person about what went wrong and how can we improve it. And really, I always really work with the junior staff. I've always provided, rather than rewriting it, I provide a reason why I want certain things. So trying to explain why it is important. Certain things are not as important, but so trying to explain and then really work with them. Sometimes you really sit with the junior person. In the past, you could sit in the office next to each other and just really highlighting why you think you can improve it. And as someone more senior, it's also my responsibility. I should be training, and I really care that they succeed. It's a pity if they can't succeed, and we always try to get them to do jobs that they're most interested in, etc. We have had people who are really good at medical writing. We'll focus on that. But you as a leader, we have responsibilities as well to really care for the junior staff. But I give them benefit of the doubt, but I don't want to see 10 times the same mistake, because I want a learning trajectory.
Yeah.
So I can be, can be really strict about some things. Not first time, but if you make the same mistake and you don't see that learning trajectory, then
you have to really put their nose on the facts.
You as a person, you need to be able to try to figure it out yourself, work with it, talk with other people, and be open, and don't be afraid to make a mistake.
And then make those decisions.
And don't cover your mistakes. I know some people who try to cover the mistakes and don't want to admit they made a mistake. Just be honest internally.
Make the decision and own what comes out.
Own your own life and your own work. Everyone is responsible for their bits and pieces, but without everyone taking their ownership, everything will fall apart.
Very nice. Well said. Actually, you kind of answered. I had a last question in mind. You kind of answered it. Maybe had some answers to it already, but covered a lot of things today. Things about, let's say, we've only really touched on like some of the problems in the university system. I don't want to make it too negative, but let's say you're a young person right now, you know, like 16 to 28, whatever. You see the problems, right? You see, okay, they don't really teach like a lot of understanding or life skills in a lot of these places. A lot of people aren't looking for it. What would your advice to them be? What do you recommend they do, other than come to ALM, obviously?
Take ownership of your own life and really connect with people. Try to actually talk to people, ask people questions, motivations, and travel around. The one thing don't get out of your own little group of friends. Move somewhere else and be and observe them what's happening. As a student, I went to the US for 6 months. This is pre-internet, pre any easy, cheap phones and WhatsApp and all that. It really challenged me, but you learn from it. And I had a great time and decided I didn't want to live in the US necessarily. It wasn't my culture. But without doing that, I wouldn't know a lot of the positive aspects of the US, which I hadn't realized beforehand. And really move around and don't stick because you're comfortable. So I think that look beyond your own little city.
Get out of your